Well, folks, it's October, and you know what that means. Pumpkin spice lattes are absolutely everywhere, it's getting nice and cold outside, and it's perfectly acceptable to skip class and binge watch a bunch of horror movies. The doll is killing people, obviously fake. I really like this time of year, just autumn, the transition from summer to winter. I don't know, I just really like the cold weather. And I kind of like October too, just because of it's the whole spooky season, and everybody's trying to do something that's kind of like invokes the feeling of Halloween. And this specific October, I was kind of feeling that way too. But I was also feeling a strange bit of nostalgia, and I wasn't quite sure why. But then a funny thing happened. A little word popped into the back of my head. A little word that unearthed a bunch of memories that I had not thought about in ages. So, show of hands, who here remembers Creepypasta? If you frequented the internet in the late 2000s, early 2010s, then chances are good that you've at the very least heard of Creepypasta. That was the point in time when they were probably at their most popular. The term Creepypasta is actually a portmanteau of the words creepy and copypasta. Combine them together, you get Creepypasta, makes sense. And the word creepypasta is generally used to describe internet horrors and legends, stuff like that. Now, like I said, creepypastas were a very big thing in around the early 2010s. That's when I first heard about them. I had a friend back in middle school, because I was in middle school in the early 2010s. I had a friend, and we kind of had this thing where pretty much every day after school, we would just kind of hang out for a while, and he would look up creepy videos or whatever on YouTube, and he would just kind of show them to me, because back then he knew that I absolutely hated creepy stuff, and a part of me thinks that the reason he did that was just because he got a kick out of scaring me, which, I mean, fair enough. It was very easy it was very easy for me to get scared, is what I'm saying. I mean, I still get scared easily, but the difference between me now and me back then is that now I actually like it. As time has gone on, though, the word creepypasta, or just the entire genre in general, has really fallen in popularity, and nowadays you really don't hear anything about it. And I think there are definitely some valid reasons for that. But today, I just kind of wanted to, take a trip down memory lane, talk about some of these creepypastas, take a little bit of a closer look at them, see what they were all about, and maybe see whether or not any of them actually hold up under a modern lens. So there we go. There's my Halloween video for the year. Let's celebrate the spooky season by taking a look at creepypasta and see how well they hold up. Now, the first creepypasta I want to take a look at can be dated all the way back to the year 2008. I think. Honestly, with some of these, the exact dates and when they pop up are a little hard to keep track of. But anyways, at some point in this year, someone going by the username Killer Jeff would upload this simple image on a forum post. Now, while not a lot was known about the person in this image, word would quickly spread that the person's name was actually Jeff, and that he was, in fact, a teenage-aged serial killer, and thus would begin one of the most well-known characters in internet history. Of course, many people were very intrigued by the idea of Jeff the Killer, as he would be called, and so in response, the creator of the character decided to give him a spooky origin story. And what exactly is the origin of Jeff the Killer? Well, you see, one day our boy Jeff was trying to clean his bathtub using a bucket of acid, as you do, when he slipped and accidentally fell because he's a klutz. The acid he was carrying spilled all over his face and hideously scarred him. When he looked in the mirror, he saw his reflection, saw that he was horrifically ugly, he went insane, and decided to kill people, I guess. I exaggerated a bit there, but yeah, that was the original origin of Jeff the Killer. He was trying to clean his bathtub, he spilled acid all over his face, and he decided to kill people. I say original origin because a little while later, somebody actually came up with kind of like a reboot version of his backstory, tried to give him something that wasn't absolutely ridiculous. So in this new origin, Jeff is this new kid moving into this new neighborhood. And to get acclimated to all these new neighbors, he's invited to the birthday party of one of the neighborhood kids. During the party, a fight breaks out between Jeff and some bullies. A bunch of stuff happens where he accidentally spills acid all over his face. It hideously scars him and breaks his mental stuff, and he decides to start killing people. I mean, it's not, I'm paraphrasing, but it's really not that much better of an origin story. I mean, it's basically the same thing, just like slightly less ridiculous, a little bit more believable. Jeff the Killer is one of the most well-known creepypastas, particularly because of how difficult it is to take the character seriously. And I think part of that is because, well, for one, the character really just hasn't aged well at all. And for another, I think it's part of what he represents, at least to me. Jeff the Killer, to me, is the perfect representation of angsty teenagers. Remember when you were in middle school and you had that one class with that one kid who thought he was being like super edgy because he went out of his way to say as many racial slurs in conversation as possible? Or like that one kid who like wouldn't wear a coat no matter how cold it got outside because wearing a coat would indicate that he actually cares about his well-being and caring is for stupid, uncool people. That's him. That's the kind of person that Jeff the Killer reminds me of. And part of that is because that's kind of the audience he attracted. Jeff the Killer became very popular almost exclusively with that certain type of people. Those angsty teenagers who for some reason think it's really cool to have bipolar disorder. And I think that's pretty much why everybody just kind of sees the character as a complete joke, because he was pretty much worshipped by this subset of teenagers. Like, all the edgy teenage boys wanted to be him, and all the edgy teenage girls wanted to date him. And yeah, he just sucks. He really doesn't hold up well under a modern lens. But I think I've talked about him enough, so let's move on. Slenderman is a bit of a standout when it comes to creepypasta, because out of all the creepypastas, to my knowledge, he's the only one that actually, hit the mainstream. The origin of the Slenderman can be traced all the way back to a 2009 post on the Something Awful forum. Basically, the forum held a contest asking for people to submit photoshopped images that were both creepy and believable. Of the people that submitted entries to the contest, the winner of them all would end up being one Eric Knudsen, who submitted this simple image. The image was a simple picture of a bunch of kids and a creepy guy standing in the background. The character in particular would go by many names before the internet pretty much agreed on the name Slenderman. The Slenderman, basically, is a tall, thin, human-like creature who hangs out in woods and stalks pretty much anybody who's unfortunate enough to come across him, pretty much kidnapping them after a set amount of time. The most standout feature of the Slenderman, of course, being the fact that he has no face. What really put Slenderman on the map were two things. The first was the YouTube series Marble Hornets. Marble Hornets is a found footage series that follows a man named Jay who tries to figure out what happened to a student film production for a film called Marble Hornets. And he eventually comes to learn that the production of the student film was repeatedly interrupted and ruined and stalked by the malicious Slenderman. The series ran for a long time, actually, clocking in at, I think, 87 videos, with a few extras on some other channels. But arguably the more popular of these two was the 2012 indie game Slender: The 8 Pages. In the 8 pages, the player is placed inside this giant forest, and the aim of the game is to wander around and locate 8 separate pages that are located on various landmarks in the forest. As the player collects more pages, the Slenderman becomes more agitated and begins to hunt the player, and basically the player just needs to collect all 8 pages while not getting captured. The reason the 8 pages worked back in the day is because it was a very simple premise that went for a very minimalistic feel. You know, pretty much anybody could play it, and it wasn't bombarding you with jump scares every 5 seconds. It was also very easy when it came to Let's Plays. That's pretty much how the game became as popular as it did. A bunch of people set up cameras and recorded themselves playing the game and overreacting to the few jump scares that the game actually had. It's my belief that the game only became as popular as it did because of that Let's Play dynamic. If a bunch of people hadn't gotten into it and hadn't played it and gotten popular off of it, I totally think that Slender the 8 Pages would have fallen into obscurity. And the reason I think that is because the game is, in fact, quite boring. The game is just you wandering around a forest for 20 minutes trying to find some pieces of paper. I mean, yeah, the Slenderman is chasing you for the whole thing, but as long as you don't look directly at him, you're pretty much fine. But yeah, the game became popular for a while, and as a result, the character of Slenderman really became popular for a while. And then 2014 happened. So basically, on May 31st, 2014, famously, two 12-year-old girls lured a friend of theirs into a forest near their town or their school or wherever, and they repeatedly stabbed their friend with the intent of offering her as a sacrifice to meet the Slender Man. These two literal psychopaths tried to murder their friend because they thought that the Slender Man, a fictional character, was real. Now, miraculously, their victim survived, thank God. And from what I've researched, of the two perpetrators, one of them is currently in a mental institution, and the other one is on house arrest. One of them actually did express remorse over their action. They were like, yeah, no, this was a terrible thing that I've done and I'm sorry. And the other one was like, yeah, no, I don't regret a thing, which is absolutely terrifying. And listen, I don't mean to make light of such a terrible thing. Again, the victim survived. That's great. But I think this kind of ruined the Slender Man character. Someone got really screwed up because of this internet legend. You don't just forget that. That baggage is stuck with this character for the rest of time. And yeah, after 2014, Slenderman's popularity just kind of fizzled out. And then for some reason in 2018, there was a movie about him. I saw this movie. I saw this movie in theaters for some reason. And it's probably one of the worst horror movies I've ever seen. So yeah, in short, I think Slenderman is still an interesting idea for a character. It's just that his popularity ended, ages ago. We're on to other stuff now. So, moving on. Abandoned by Disney is a weird one because for some reason to me, it feels like this story is a lot more popular, or was a lot more popular than it actually was. So the narrator of this story explains that at one point in time, Disney constructed a Treasure Island-themed resort in the Bahamas. The resort cost about $30 million to make, and then as soon as it was completed, Disney abandoned it. The narrator of the story decides to go and investigate, takes a look at the old decrepit resort, and eventually comes across a building called Mowgli's Palace. The inside of the building, as the narrator describes, is very weird. Anything that isn't nailed down is completely stolen. There appears to be running water despite the fact that it's been abandoned for years. He hears whispers all around him despite him being the only person there. Eventually he finds a back room titled Mascots Only. He goes in, he explores it a bit, and one of the things he finds is an old Mickey Mouse suit. The thing about it being that the colors of it are completely inverted. As the narrator tries to take a picture of the suit with his camera, the Mickey Mouse costume suddenly gets up, it looks at him, and says, "Hey, you want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy glove-clad fingers around its neck, with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood. So much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh, only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not for my life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. Abandoned by Disney used to really freak me out the first couple times I heard of it. I have no idea why. I don't know why this one freaked me out so bad, because in retrospect, it's really just kind of a basic haunted house story when you think about it. There were a few sequels written to this story, none of which I've read. My time's too valuable. With hindsight, though, it's really not that bad of a story, but at the same time, it's not really anything special. You know, it's just kind of there, you know? So, yeah, no, not much to say about this one. Moving on. I realize that the way I've been structuring this video kind of makes it sound like every single creepypasta ever written just hasn't held up over time, which isn't true, actually, because I do think there are some genuinely really good creepypastas that still work nowadays, and so let's highlight a few. I want to start with this one called Ted the Caver. This story is set up kind of like a blog post, a series of blogs written by a guy named Ted. So Ted explains that he and a friend who he refers to as B, they like spelunking, and on one last trip they decide to go and check out this cave that they've never found before. Eventually they find this small hole that they really want to get through, so over the course of a few weeks or so they start picking away at the hole, trying to get through and see what kind of caverns are on the other side. Over these couple weeks, as they dig and try to make the hole bigger, some weird stuff starts happening. They start hearing some weird noises. They start seeing hallucinations. They think they see stuff. Eventually, they're able to get the small passage wide enough for Ted to get through. And he eventually finds himself, after squeezing through, he finds himself in a bigger area of the cave. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but basically what happens is as he explores, he starts getting really freaked out. He starts feeling like something is like following him or chasing him, and he pretty much books it out of there. In the last post of the story, Ted explains that he has to go back into the cave. He needs to figure out what's in there just for the sake of closure. Many of you don't agree with my decision to pursue this cave. I know this from the messages I've received. I'm afraid I don't have a choice. If I'm ever to experience restful slumber, I must return. If I'm ever to walk the halls of my own home in peace, I must return. For my family and friends who are reading this, I say, be at peace. I will conquer this cave, then I will return and update this website immediately. I will include any photos we take in the cave today, and if you stop by the house, I'll show you the video I will have. I expect to be home later tonight or tomorrow at the latest. See all of you soon with a lot of answers. Love, Ted. And that's where the story ends. What happened to Ted? We don't know. What makes Ted the Caver work as a story is the fact that it's very mysterious. We don't get an answer as to what's going on with the cave. We never learn what happens to Ted, whether or not he's alive, whether or not he dies in the cave. And because of the lack of answers, because of how much we don't know, yeah, it's pretty unsettling. Plus, there's also the fact that it's a story about caving or spelunking, and people like me who have serious claustrophobia when it comes to stuff like that, you know. There's that whole sense. So, you know. But yeah, Ted the Caver is one of the earliest examples of creepypasta in general. It came out as a series of posts between 2000 and 2001 on Angel Fire. And yeah, I can see why. I see it as a good example of how a creepypasta can work. One of the more popular subgenres of creepypasta is the kind that deals with media. You know, like canceled TV shows, canceled episodes of TV shows. But for the last few that we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about video game creepypastas. Video game creepypastas are kind of weird because this specific subgenre was very popular for some reason. And I think part of what popularized this specific subgenre was the 2010 story Ben Drowned. Like Ted the Caver, Ben Drowned takes the form of a bunch of blog posts. It takes place from the perspective of a guy named Alex Hall, who goes by the online alias Jed Usable. One day at a garage sale, he spots a Nintendo 64 cartridge, which simply has the word Majora written on black marker. He buys the game and takes it home. And when he plays the game, he realizes that it's a copy of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Things start off relatively normally, just a few glitches and stuff, nothing serious. But then Alex tries to do the infamous Day 4 glitch. And as soon as he does, things get absolutely wild. A bunch of weird stuff starts happening. Text boxes show up when they're not supposed to. The game's locations are out of order. And most famously, the game's Song of Healing is playing the whole while, but in reverse. After doing some research, Alex is convinced that the game cartridge is possessed by the spirit of a boy named Ben, who, you guessed it, drowned, and then his spirit just kind of found its way into this game. And in-game, his spirit takes the form of the in-game Elegy of Emptiness statue. What makes Ben Drowned work as a story is not just because of the fact that it was one of the first of its kind, but also the fact of how the creator went out of his way to make the story feel real. Like I said, the story was set up as a series of blog posts, but along with the written stuff, there was actually a series of videos on the Jed Usable YouTube channel, which directly showed the creepy stuff that was happening. And the combination of video and the way the story was written, it came off as very believable. A lot of people did genuinely believe that this was a real thing. Of course, the author eventually came out and revealed that it was in fact just a story, but I don't think that really detracted from its effectiveness, because it's still a very effective story. There were a few sequels to this story, which get absolutely crazy. They talk about cults and gods and the collapse of society, and that's all fine, but I feel like these sequel stories kind of lose the creepiness that comes with the simplicity of the original Ben Drowned story. Still though, Ben Drowned was a very popular story, and it was kind of an inspiration for a bunch of other people to write their own video game-based creepypasta stories, some of which just as well got very popular, such as... A lot of these video game creepypastas follow a very similar format, where the main character, the narrator, or whoever, they'll find a video game that's a little weird, they play it, a bunch of creepy stuff happens, they turn it off, and that's about it. Ben Drowned followed that basic structure, but given that it was one of the first of its kind, I can give it a pass for being as basic as it is. The one I want to talk about right now, though, is Sonic.exe, one of the more infamous creepypastas out there. So the main character of this story is a guy named Tom, and one day Tom gets a letter in the mail from his friend Kyle, and included with the letter is a CD, and Kyle in the letter is like, hey, this CD is really evil or something, could you just destroy it or something? Don't play the game, just destroy the CD and destroy the evil that's on it. So Tom is curious, he thinks that's a little weird, and then he sees the CD and it's got Sonic.exe written on it in black marker. And of course, being the smart person that he is, he immediately ignores the letter and starts playing it. When he turns on the game, it starts just like a normal copy of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, except when he presses the start button, the title screen flashes for an instant, and it shows an evil Sonic with a rusty logo and bloody water. He then gets to a character select screen, which has Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Robotnik selectable. And as he plays through each character's little scenario, they run through all these warped levels that are all creepy. They got dead animals and what the author describes as hyper-realistic blood, which is like realistic blood, but hyper. So each character, as Tom plays them, they each get harassed and then killed by this creepy Sonic. So Tom plays through all three scenarios, and as soon as all the characters have suffered this terrible fate, this goofy-looking evil Sonic pops up, and Tom comes to his ultimate conclusion. Sonic is the very embodiment of evil. He tortures people who play his game in more ways than one. And then, when he gets bored, he drags you into the game, literally drags you to hell, where he can play with you always as his toy. Well, I mean, it's nice to know that he got one thing right. Sonic.exe was very popular for a while. Like Slenderman, someone made a fan game based off of the original Creepypasta that a bunch of YouTubers played. But then I think a lot of people started to realize how bad the story actually is. It eventually got banned off of the original Creepypasta website. Then the author got like really angry and started calling people like furry haters or something. It got pretty pathetic, honestly. I like to consider Sonic.exe as the inverse of Ben Drowned. Because Ben Drowned was set up in a way that made it look like it could be believable, like it could realistically happen. Sonic.exe, on the other hand, just comes off as a bad Sonic fanfiction. So yeah, those are just a handful of all the creepypastas that were out there at the time. You know, there are a lot that I didn't mention. You know, Suicide Mouse, the NES Godzilla, Cupcakes, Squidward Suicide, all that stuff. The main question I want to ask now is, why did creepypasta die? Why is it less popular than it used to be? Well, I think the reason mostly that people don't really talk about creepypasta anymore is, and this is going to come off as so anticlimactic, but that's just kind of how the internet works. You know, something's popular for a while, and then it just stops being popular. People just kind of got tired of creepypasta, you know. I mean, it doesn't help that a lot of them are total garbage, but yeah, I think it just went the way of everything else that's popular. It just stopped. Now, that's not to say that internet horror, just as a genre, is dead, because that's far from the case. I think internet horror is in a very good place right now, and I think part of that is because of the lessons that people took from creepypasta. You got things like Petscop, Siren Head, The Backrooms, Analog Horror. All of this stuff is kind of like an evolved form of what creepypasta introduced. And we're at a point where we can kind of display them and show them off in more interesting ways. So while creepypasta is by no means as popular as it used to be, I still think that it's a very important part of internet culture. And given what's come from it, no, I don't think it was a very bad thing to begin with. I think we should start a petition to make Abandoned by Disney a world in Kingdom Hearts 4. You know, like it's just one room, and like Sora walks in, and then King Mickey's like, "Yo, Sora, check it out! I can take my head off now." And then Sora's just like, "Okay," and then leaves. Like, I don't know. That sounds way funnier in my head than it is in real life. So.